Team Fortress 2 has a ton of unlockable weapons, roughly 160 depending on what you count as a separate weapon because of reskins. These unlocks provide a great deal of variety and replayability, but not all are created equally. If you are a new player who is overwhelmed by the choices, or maybe you are just curious to hear what the strongest set of weapons for each class is in modern day tf2, then look no further. There are other videos about this topic on YouTube, but many of them are outdated, or they have chosen a different set of items than what I have. Just a quick disclaimer, this list is my opinion. If you disagree, or think I missed something, let me know in the comments, and of course you are free to use whatever items you want. With that out of the way, I'll start each class off with what I believe to be the strongest overall loadout, and then I will also give a bonus loadout that I find to be the most fun. For the sake of time, I am not going to be mentioning items that are considered by most to be weaker, and instead focus on the best few items in each weapon slot and why I think my pick is the overall strongest. So, without any further ado, the best overall scout loadout is the stock scattergun, the Mad Milk, and the atomizer. This set doesn't really have any theme or specific item synergies, it is just the best item in each slot. Some might argue that the Soda Popper is stronger than the stock scattergun, but personally the sustain that having 6 shots provides is simply irreplaceable to me, especially with the Mad Milk equipped. Speaking of the Mad Milk, it is no secret that this is Scout's strongest secondary. Scout has a ton of powerful unlocks, and some are even situationally stronger than the Milk. However, the Milk is extremely useful for not only selfish use, but also supporting your team. Damaging enemies soaked in Mad Milk will heal the shooter for 60% of the damage dealt. This is incredibly strong since Scout does a ton of damage, and he's extremely hard to hit. This results in a meat shot healing Scout for roughly 60 health, which is half of his health by the way, and he can do this repeatedly. This gives the most health efficient class in the game a way to get more health, which is disproportionately useful because he is already so hard to hit. Of course, there is a downside to the Mad Milk, being that you have to actually hit someone with it before you get the upside. I find myself primarily using the Mad Milk on bulkier targets such as heavies, since for light classes like snipers and medics, I would just rather spend my time shooting instead of taking a second to throw my milk, increasing my time to kill. Of course, the other downside is the opportunity cost of not having a pistol, which is arguably stronger if you have a medic, but again, this video is focused on the overall strongest loadout that is well-rounded and powerful in all situations. If your team has multiple medics, then you will get diminishing returns from healing items, but that doesn't mean that the insane healing of the Milk isn't strong. Before I get to the melees, I want to point out that the Mad Milk can also extinguish yourself and your teammates who are on fire, which can definitely come in clutch. Also, it is really good for tracking invisible spies. Finally, I would consider the Atomizer to be Scout's strongest melee weapon, at least in the vast majority of situations. The triple jump is useful for getting to spots that are normally unreachable, or at least would require a longer path. This is relevant because in some situations, getting to where you want to go as quickly as possible can determine whether or not you are successful. Some maps have more useful atomizer jumps than others, but the atomizer is also useful for making some movements require less precise inputs. Sure, the Boston Basher can be used to build Ubercharge, but in a pub environment this is rarely necessary. The Rap Assassin is strong because it provides Scout with a powerful long-range spam option on an extremely short cooldown, but I find that the additional mobility without having to sacrifice the Mad Milk to bring the Winger is worth losing out on the extra spam that the Rap Assassin provides. Now, moving on to the most fun loadout. Deciding was difficult since he doesn't really have any unlocks that completely change how you play him. That being said, the loadout that I think is the most fun in the majority of situations would be the stock scattergun, the Winger, and the Rap Assassin. I chose stock because it is the best for killing things, which is pretty fun. The Winger is alright for cleaning up low health enemies, but the main reason I find it fun is the mobility it gives you. This is somewhat map dependent since not all maps have spots where the Winger is super valuable, but on maps like Swiftwater or Phoenix, you can get some pretty crazy value. Juking out opponents and leaving them bewildered is hilarious, and lightning fast flanks that are made possible by this pistol are a total blast. Sure, the Atomizer provides similar mobility, but due to its deploy speed, it can't be used quite as quickly as the Winger, And of course, if you have the atomizer, you can't bring the Wrap Assassin, which is very fun for spamming long-range baubles across the map. Deciding what the overall best loadout for Soldier is was rather difficult for me, because I feel like there are at least 2 items in each slot that could be considered the best. That being said, I eventually settled on the stock rocket launcher or the original, which I'm considering one and the same for this video, the gunboats, and the disciplinary action. For the primary slot, I was considering choosing the Cowmangler, but I feel like the reduced building damage is too big of a downside in most games, so stock it is. Just to be clear, there are always going to be situations where the items that I pick aren't the absolute strongest, but I am focused on picking loadouts that are going to be super well-rounded so that you could just always have them equipped and never worry about it. For the secondary, I had to go with the gunboats because, well, they are simply that good in the right hands. Taking 60% less damage from rocket jumping is the only thing that the gunboats do, but boy is it a game changer. I could go on and on and on about why this is the case, but for the sake of time, I'll sum it up as this. Movement speed is really good in tf2, and it often trumps more firepower or brief team support abilities. If you don't know how to rocket jump, I recommend that you learn because it is really fun, but until you figure that out, then the gunboats are not going to be the best pick. Instead, I recommend bringing along a shotgun for extra firepower or a banner for team support. Originally, I had the escape plan for the best melee, and for a while I was considering the Market Gardener as well. Both of these options are fantastic, but I think the disciplinary action is just too powerful to not put as the strongest. When you hit your teammates with the whip, it provides both of you with a speed boost. This speed boost is essentially free, and it has such a huge impact on symmetrical game modes like Control Points and King of the Hill, where teams roll out to the point simultaneously. Your team getting to the point just a second or 2 earlier can make or break the whole round. Furthermore, you can help particularly slow classes with their rollout, such as Engineer and Heavy. But the benefits don't just stop at helping your team. Having a 40% speed boost also helps you by preserving crit heals during a rollout. Additionally, the whip speed helps make your bombs better, meaning you will get even more value out of your gunboats. Just a quick aside, the whip speed boost actually varies depending on the class, giving Scout the smallest movement buff of 25% and Soldier and Heavy the largest of 40%. The boost also lasts longer for the Soldier with the whip at 3.6 seconds, and the other player gets a 2-second boost. Also, the weapon has an extended reach. Moving on to the most fun Soldier loadout, I have the Beggar's Bazooka Soldier, also known as the ICBM. Unlike the strongest loadout, I didn't have any difficulty choosing this since this playstyle is just so much fun. The only caveat is that it takes a while to learn because jumping with the Beggar's Bazooka is tricky. The Beggar's Bazooka is the primary choice for this loadout, with the gunboats as your secondary and the Market Gardener as the melee. For the sake of time, I am not going to go over how the Beggar's Bazooka works because it is somewhat complex. Long story short, this item completely changes the way Soldier plays, and it allows for an extremely mobile and aggressive playstyle. Okay, well, maybe Soldier does that already, but the Beggars takes it to the next level. You can do extremely fast and spontaneous jumps that are normally impossible with stock, and combo them with the Market Gardener for crazy style points. I will link my Beggar's Bazooka guide in the description of this video if you want to learn more. For Pyro's best loadout, I have the Degreaser, the Scorch Shot, and the Power Jack. Unlike Soldier, this decision was easy because I believe all of these weapons to be the strongest in their item slot by far. I think most folks would agree that my choice for secondary and melee is the strongest, but some might disagree with the Degreaser. In my opinion, it is Pyro's strongest primary because the faster switch time allows you to spend more time using your secondary. If you have your Scorch Shot pulled out and you spot a projectile that you need to air blast, the extra swap speed makes this much easier to pull off. Obviously, the Degreaser's reduced afterburn damage and increased air blast cost downsides hurt, but in the grand scheme of things, I find the pros to far outweigh the cons. Some players might argue that the Flog is stronger than the Degreaser, but the Flog can't air blast, and air blast is Pyro's strongest ability, full stop. The Scorch Shot is easily Pyro's most overpowered weapon, and it is incredibly annoying to play against, but hey, this video is about the strongest loadouts, not the most ethical. Anyways, the Scorch Shot has insanely powerful long-range spam, the ability to clear sticky bombs, and of course it has an annoying stun mechanic on top of all that if you land a direct. If you are spamming the Scorch Shot frequently, you will be consistently setting players on fire, putting tons of pressure on the other team, all from across the map. Remember, Pyro is meant to be the short-range class. This weapon is broken. Lastly, the Power Jack is easily Pyro's strongest melee weapon. An almost free 15% movement speed buff when you pull out your melee is insanely good, and the increased damage taken is only when you hold out the item, so in most cases this downside does not matter. I did have to look at the wiki to confirm, but you get 25 health on kill with this item, but this basically never happens in my games because at close range I would be using my flamethrower. So really all this thing does is provide insanely good movement speed to Pyro. While this loadout consists of all the strongest items, it doesn't really have much identity or synergy. This segues into my next loadout, which I will call Combo Pyro. This set also features the degreaser because the weapon swap speed is useful for our goal of lighting the target on fire, then switching to a different weapon for extra burst damage. Now, I'm going to cheat a little bit and make this into two loadouts, mostly because there are two separate items that work really well for Combo Pyro, but it doesn't really pay to bring both. So option 1, you bring Degreaser, Flare Gun, and the Power Jack. This is probably the stronger of the two because a Puff and Sting with the Flare Gun is easier to pull off, and the Power Jack also gives you crazy value for free, like usual. The second option is Degreaser, Detonator, and the Extinguisher. This iteration, your secondary provides you the movement ability, and your melee weapon is the combo weapon. While this is way cooler looking and more fun when it actually works, this is a much less reliable loadout in my experience. Demoman is my personal favorite class, and while I think he has a lot of very strong unlocks, picking the absolute strongest loadout was pretty easy for me. The Lock and Load is easily the strongest primary for Demo. I already made a video about grenade launcher balance, so I'll keep this short. The faster projectiles the Lock and Load fires mean that hitting direct grenades is easier, and the extra damage to buildings is just a cherry on top. These upsides far outweigh the reduced clip and splash damage downsides. While some people may disagree with that choice, I think everyone will concur on the strongest Demoman secondary. Of course, that would be the Sticky Bomb Launcher. If you are a long-time viewer of this channel, it needs no introduction, but if you are new to tf2, let me tell you this. Sticky Spam is crazy overpowered. I've made a number of videos about Demoman, so if you are looking to improve his sticky bombs, go check those out. The only other secondary that would even be considered to take the #1 spot is the Quickie Bomb Launcher, and while it is certainly good, going from 8 bombs in your clip to 4 is just too big of a downside. Oh yeah, for your melee, the stock bottle or a reskin is best. Other than Demo Knight focus items that aren't worth bringing on a stock demo build, you don't get any utility melees like the other classes. The overpowered nature of the rest of your kit makes up for that though. Moving on to the most fun demo loadout, this was another tough one to decide on. I eventually chose the stock grenade launcher for your main source of damage, the sticky bomb launcher for insane mobility, and the caber for the possibility of flashy jumps. This loadout falls into a similar category as the ICBM soldier, since if you know how to sticky jump, you will be flying around the map at Mach 5. The Iron Bomber or the Lock and Load would also be decent options for your primary, but I went with the stock grenade launcher because it has a bigger clip than the Lock, but also a longer range than the Iron Bomber. Since it will be your primary source of damage, the extra explosion radius is also nice. Demoman has a ton of very fun unlocks, but I felt like this combo was the most fun of the group simply because of its crazy fast and consistent mobility, along with its serious damage output if you are able to hit direct grenades. While it is possible to achieve even crazier movement combos with other loadouts, you do sacrifice your damage output a bit by bringing something like the Loose Cannon. The best overall loadout for Heavy consists of the Tomislav, the Sandwich, and the Fists of Steel. While I am personally a stock minigun enjoyer, I do believe that the Tomislav is generally stronger than it in most situations, although there are certainly times where a minigun is better. However, in the majority of scenarios, the Tomislav will do the job better, assuming you have good enough aim to get the most out of its tighter bullet spread. The Sandwich should be no surprise here. You can use it to heal yourself to full health, or you can feed a teammate with it by right-clicking, providing a medium health pack worth of healing. I've talked about the Sandwich quite a bit recently, so I don't want to spend too much time glazing it. However, I just want to point out the importance of having a reliable heal on Heavy, the slowest class in the game. Being able to heal yourself if you can find a few seconds to snack allows you to keep up the pressure in situations where no other secondary would compete. The only real competition comes from the second banana, which has a faster cooldown but heals you for only 200 health. I prefer the sandwich mostly because I find that healing to full is more important than being able to eat more often. Let me put it this way. If you are weak and eat a banana, you won't heal to full, and while you would get your food back much quicker, you may be dead before you're able to eat again. Lastly, the Fists of Steel are the obvious choice in my book. If you didn't know, they provide a 40% resistance to ranged damage when pull out, but they also make you take double melee damage. This is extremely powerful when you consider heavy is quite tanky. The downside other than taking more melee damage is that they have a slow weapon swap speed. If you have your sandwich off cooldown, you can switch to it first, then your minigun to get around the swap speed, so I find that this isn't a big deal. Regardless of the extra damage taken from melees, as long as you aren't super overextended, this shouldn't matter much as your team can provide support as you back up with the fists out. So long story short, this item has a huge upside with relatively insignificant downsides. Unfortunately, when compared to other mercenaries, the heavy doesn't really have a lot of unlocks that give him alternative playstyles. As a result, the most fun loadout in my opinion is essentially just a reskin of the meta loadout, that being the stock minigun, the sandwich, and the Fist of Steel. The fun here just comes from mowing down groups of enemies, which isn't as cool as something like Sticky Jump or Demo, but hey, it's still very satisfying and a lot easier to pull off than you might think. Engineer was the hardest class for me to choose the definitive best loadout, partially because I play him the least, and also because many of his items are situationally the best. Good Engineer players will constantly change loadouts to be more efficient. That being said, if I had to have just one loadout I had to run forever, I would pick the stock shotgun, the Wrangler, and the Jag. Of course, the Rescue Ranger is ideal on points when you have a lot of safety, such as Upward Last, because this means you have no need for the extra firepower of the shotgun, and you can just tank your gun from long ranges. However, the Rescue Ranger is less useful once your buildings go down, or if you are attempting to get set back up and are ambushed by a spy or something else. The Wrangler really needs no explanation. Press 2 and immediately triple your sentry's health, and also double the damage by manually aiming the gun. Oh, did I mention it comes with aim assist? As much as I love the pistol, there is no denying that the Wrangler is broken overpowered. Now, that doesn't stop me from using the pistol most of the time anyways, because I just think it's a lot more fun. Speaking of secondaries that are overpowered and unfun, the Engineer also has the Short Circuit available. This unlock is definitely stronger than the Wrangler in some situations, such as pushing the cart on payload offense where there is literally zero downside to spamming the ridiculous projectile deleting Kamehameha bullshit, why is this weapon in the game. However, as I have said before, I'm picking items for consistent value and not situational strength. Lastly, the Jag is just the strongest wrench in the majority of situations. Of course, the teleportation abilities of the Eureka effect allows you to roll out more efficiently and opens the door for some funny flank plays. The stock wrench or the Southern Hospitality are better for keeping a level 3 sentry gun alive, but a lot worse for getting it built. Regardless of what wrench you are running, you will need to rebuild buildings, so the Jag will just provide the most value if you only use one melee. Of course, for the best results, swapping between wrenches mid-match is ideal. Moving on to my personal favorite loadout for the Engineer, we have Battle Engi. This consists of the shotgun, the pistol for extra on-demand firepower, and the gunslinger for the extra health and disposable mini-sentries. A lot of players underestimate just how effective an Engineer can be in battle, and you can definitely use this to your advantage. An important note here is that teleporters are really strong, so don't neglect building and maintaining one just because your loadout is more combat ready than the average Engineer. Moving on to the Medic, the strongest class in the game, the primary and secondary weapons are an easy pick. The Crusader's crossbow and the stock medigun. Both of these items just completely dominate the competition. The crossbow is the only medic primary that actually helps you do the job of the medic, which is keeping your team alive. It is also pretty decent at defending yourself, and if you didn't know, the crossbow actually has inverse damage ramp up. So if you hit an enemy at long range, it can deal up to 75 damage, and hitting an ally from across the map can kill up to 150 health. That is insane clutch potential, along with a very strong 75 health burst heal at close ranges. If you want to use one of the syringe guns, be my guest, but not only are these items inferior from a meta standpoint, but they are also just a lot less fun to use in my experience. But to each their own. Speaking of meta, the stock medigun is like the poster child of meta items in Team Fortress 2. Unlike the crossbow, which has no real competition, medic does have some pretty good unlocks in the secondary slot, but these are only situationally strong. Stock is going to be good in every single game, so it perfectly fits the criteria for this video. To rattle off the reasons why stock is king, it is tied for the strongest overheals with the Kritzkrieg, beating out the Quick Fix and the Vaccinator. It has the best Uber in the game by far, compared to the absolutely terrible Quick Fix Uber and the situationally strong Vaccinator and crits, and it also heals just as fast as the Kritzkrieg and the Vaccinator. I'm not going to go into much detail about the Quick Fix, which seems like it would be better than the stock medigun, since it has a 40% faster base heal rate, but it's just not. The Uber charge is trash. The overheals only provide 125% health instead of 150, and they decay at the same rate, so they only last for half as long. The Quick Fix Uber charge is terrible, and the Crusader's crossbow burst heals are still faster than the Quick Fix's base heal rate. The 10% extra Uber charge build rate sounds strong, but when you crunch the numbers, this only ends up being roughly 4 to 6 seconds, and the Quick Fix Uber charge is pretty terrible. The only actually good thing about this item is that it mirrors your heal target's blast jumps, which is good when your team is coordinating, but having a useful Uber like the stock Uber or the Kritzkrieg is even more powerful when your team is coordinating, and I don't think I mentioned it yet, but the Quick Fix Uber is terrible. Now, the Reddit experts will tell you that if you think the Quick Fix Uber is bad, then you are using it wrong, but have you considered the fact that the competition, stock Uber, is literally the strongest thing in the game? Actually, now that I think about it, Overheal might actually be the strongest thing in the game, since it doesn't take 40 seconds to build, but the Quick Fix is incidentally terrible at doing that too. Okay, enough about the mediguns, let's move on to the melee weapons. This was a significantly harder decision, just because there are two contenders for the best medic melee, the Solemn Vow and the Ubersaw. Ultimately, I'm going to choose the Ubersaw just because 25% Uber on hit is pretty strong when it happens, and it tends to happen a lot since casual players don't really respect it. Now, in a more serious setting, the Solemn Vow gets better and better as the skill of both teams increases, but in the vast majority of games, the Ubersaw's upsides are stronger. So, what is the most fun loadout for medic? Well, for me, that is a pretty easy pick. Crusader's crossbow, the Kritzkrieg, and the Ubersaw. While stock Uber is incredibly strong, the Kritzkrieg builds slightly faster, and instead of 8 seconds of invulnerability on you and your patient, your heal target gets crits instead. Paired with a decent Demoman, Soldier, or Heavy, you can absolutely wipe teams out as a Kritzkrieg medic. It is incredibly satisfying when you pop the crits at the perfect moment and witness the subsequent obliteration of the other team. Sniper is another pretty easy pick. Machina, Girardi, and Bushwhacka. All of these items are honestly just busted. The Machina is essentially an upgraded sniper rifle, which is already strong, but yeah, let's just give it extra damage and the ability to hit collaterals as well. The downsides that come with the Machina are that you can't shoot while unscoped, and shots give away your positioning because they have tracers. I find these downsides to be mildly annoying, but they don't really adequately balance out the upsides. Both stock and the Bizarre Bargain are arguably stronger in some situations, and to be honest, pretty much all the sniper rifles are interchangeable, so I think this is largely up to personal preference. If there are multiple snipers on the other team, it is probably worth switching off the Machina back to stock, just because the tracers will make winning a sniper fight noticeably harder. I'm going to keep it brief when talking about the Girardi, because I really hate this item from a balanced perspective. This Jar of Piss is so completely and utterly broken, I would have to be stupid to not put it as the best secondary for Sniper. Sniper has other really annoying secondaries, but those are mostly just annoying and not actually very powerful. The Girardi ticks both of these boxes. Firstly, it gives Sniper a 1-2 combo with the Bushwhacka on anybody who tries to push him, such as a Spy. Let's just give the strongest long-range class an extremely easy way to punish people for successfully getting in the range where he's supposed to be vulnerable. And apparently giving the long-range class teeth at closer range isn't enough, since the Girardi is also useful to support your team by throwing it at a crowd. Just to remind you, you take mini-crits when soaked in Girardi, which means you take 35% extra damage, and that 135% base damage does not suffer at all from damage falloff. So basically, a heavy can kill you from across the map if you are soaked in Jarate. I had to check the wiki, but this effect lasts for 10 seconds. That is insane. Also, you don't even have to aim the Jarate very well either, because its splash radius is egregiously large. So essentially you can throw the Jarate at a crowd of people and instantly win the team fight or force the other team to run. This shit is so broken, man. I already mentioned it, but the only purpose of the Bushwhacka is to get the guaranteed crits on piss-soaked opponents. Moving on to the most fun loadout, I find myself equipping the Huntsman a lot. I just don't really enjoy any of the rifles that much, so even though the Huntsman is not nearly as good, that's what I'm picking. I also like to bring the Cleaner's Carbine for 2 reasons. Firstly, you can use it to quickly finish off light classes that just took 120 damage from a Huntsman body shot, and secondly, you can use its Crikey mini crits to get guaranteed crits with the Bushwhacka. This loadout isn't crazy fun like some of the other entries, see Soldier, Pyro, and Demo, but unfortunately most of Sniper's unlocks revolve around fucking over the enemy instead of actually doing anything fun. See the Razorback, the Darwin's Danger Shield, all of the rifles, the Tribleman's Shiv, and the Jarate. Speaking of getting fucked over, the Spy is our last entry, and Spy tends to get fucked over a lot due to the nature of his kit. However, Spy can actually be the bully if you bring the right loadout, and in my opinion, the strongest Spy loadout can be incredibly oppressive. I chose the Diamondback as the primary, the Sapper as the secondary, the Stock Knife, and the Stock Sapper. The Diamondback is easily Spy's strongest revolver. It rewards Spy with guaranteed crits for simply doing his job. While the extra cloak of the L'Etranger provides nice utility, in the chaos of casual, coming by ammo packs dropped by fallen comrades and enemy combatants is easy enough, so it isn't really needed. Instead, I would recommend bringing along the insane firepower of the Diamondback. Sniping enemies from across the map after getting a few stabs is just insanely overpowered. The Ambassador from like a decade ago was arguably stronger, but it's pretty mediocre now, not to mention significantly harder to use effectively after the nerf. Anyways, I would say the Stock Knife is the strongest Spy melee. Now, are there situations where the Kunai, the Big Earner, or the Spycicle will be more valuable? Yes, but the Stock Knife is the most reliable of the bunch, and I want reliable kills to help feed my Diamondback. Speaking of reliability, I find the Stock Invis Watch to be the most reliable watch. Cloak and Dagger is nice for defense, and Deadringer can actually be very strong in some lobbies, but I find the Stock Watch to be sufficient in the majority of my games. Lastly, the Stock Sapper is just way better than the Red Tape Recorder. Not much to say about that. Similar to Engineer, I find that Spy benefits from changing loadout frequently, such as swapping to Cloak and Dagger when appropriate, or switching to L'Etranger when it is difficult to cross. So take my advice with a grain of salt, but this loadout is nasty when you can pull it off. Finally, the most fun loadout for Spy in my experience is the L'Etranger, the Deadringer, the Big Earner, and the Stock Sapper. Unlike the Diamondback, which is OP and the main focus of the previous loadout, the L'Etranger enables a more backstab-focused playstyle, which is more fun. The Big Earner synergizes well with both your gun and your watch with the extra cloak on kill, but the main draw is the speed boost, which can lead to some crazy chain stabs, as well as some trick stab opportunities. The Deadringer also provides a speed boost for trick stabs, as well as a get out of jail free card for when the 6 stabs don't pan out. No comment on the Stock Sapper. And that concludes my list of the strongest loadouts for each class in Team Fortress 2. If you disagree with anything, let me know in the comments, and thank you for watching. I might be feeding. I have a special trap.
I fucking suck.
I'm watching.
Pyro headshot, Pyro headshot.
Help! 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 Help!
Where?
Okay, I surfed out.